So would you briefly introduce yourself to the audience? Name, specialty, academic background, research interest?
Okay. My name is Sue Ellen Wright. I'm a professor in the Institute for Applied Linguistics. My appointment is actually in German language. I'm a Germanist. In addition to being a terminologist, I work with German, French, and Spanish primarily, although I work with students in many languages. My main teaching activity at Kent State is German to English technical translation and terminology, specifically computer applications for translators, which is what I usually tell people when they say, "What do you do?" I say, "I teach computer applications for translators," and they're left nonplussed and wondering, what's that all about? My research interests are primarily in terminology studies and standards for translation and terminology, both in ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, and ASTM, which is a U.S. standards body under ANSI, the American National Standards Institute.
What do you know about how translator training was first introduced at Kent State, and what role did you play at that time?
Okay, I wasn't there from the very beginning, but I know how it all started. If you have talked to Greg Shrieve, and I know you have talked to Greg Shrieve about this, it all started when he was invited to go to Leipzig to train the staff at the Institute for Applied Linguistics in Leipzig in computer use. Because at that point in time, this is back before 1989, I think that would have been about 1987, the East, the former East Bloc, was not as computer savvy as people in the West were. And we were actually exporting computers to Leipzig, old computers that we were getting rid of, and importing them into East Germany, which was not an easy thing to do. And he went there to teach people how to use computers. He became a great friend of Albrecht Neubert, who was at that time the director of the Institute, and they began to write books together. And while he was there, the then president of the university visited Leipzig and became quite impressed with what was happening at the Institute and suggested, gosh, could we do this sort of thing at Kent? And Greg, being the eternal optimist, said sure, and the rest is history. Dr. Kenny and Dr. Meyer were the first hires in French and Spanish. My husband, who was a Spanish translator, and I were invited to come down to teach classes. And when a position opened up for German, I applied for it and got the position. So I came down to teach full-time at Kent. That's how I happened to come. So I was there from almost the beginning because I was actually teaching in that first cohort of students. I wasn't here during the planning stages, but I was actually teaching SciTech translation in the German section before I was actually hired as a full-time professor.
Okay, can you tell us about the major elements of the curriculum at the early years and how have they changed over the years?
When we started, we started out already with what we call the workshop core, the notion of literary translation, SciTech translation, and legal commercial translation. Those are short forms for the titles. That has not changed much. We started with that component. We also started with the notion of a case study. That has evolved over the years, but those four courses were pretty much in place in the beginning, at least from my recollection, and the early cohorts did do that. The other changes have been ongoing over the years. My recollection is that Greg was teaching a course called Applied Linguistics, which was kind of a hodgepodge of things when you look at it now. And I'm sure he would admit that too. It was part theory. This was basically the theory that they were getting. And it was part computer applications. I can't remember just when we started teaching people HTML, but it was somewhere early on. And I taught that course on occasion, at least once or twice, I think. And I began teaching as an elective a terminology course. The terminology course turned into a required course at the request of the students, because the way it was set up, inevitably there were students who couldn't take it, and they were unhappy about that. So we ended up teaching terminology, and we melded that then with computer applications, terminology and computer applications. So this was an evolution, and at about the time we started doing that, Greg developed a course in localization and developed his own little program that the students were going to localize, which sort of grew into the fruit world that the students who do localization today know and love. And Dr. Kobe and I taught that course from time to time, but then when Dr. Dunn came on board and we had a real live localizer who'd been doing this sort of thing, the course devolved to him, and he developed the highly rigorous, realistic course that we have now in localization. That's much more valuable than the kind of thing that Greg and I were doing to begin with. We were really kind of playing around with it, but Dr. Dunn has turned it into a full-blown course. Project management was added later as we saw the need for our students to go into industry as project managers. So this has sort of evolved. The final course that was added, well, the final two courses that were added were the docs course, which I pushed for when we had an opening, a 2-hour opening in the curriculum, because I was seeing students coming in who were not well prepared to go into the computer apps course. And the whole purpose of docs was to try to level things so that everybody had more or less the same background. It's still a problem. I talk about a delta factor, a difference between the students who come in who have a lot of background and the students who don't. And it's a problem always. And to bring students up to speed, one of the issues we see also is that the students come in without the realization that there's going to be this huge computer component, and some of them even resent that. They say, this is irrelevant. I want to be a translator. I don't want to do tools. And the answer to that is, well, unless you're going to be a literary translator, which is perfectly legitimate, and then you have to look at other issues, if you're going to make a living doing this, you have to learn the tools. So that's the other course that was added on more recently is the editing course, which we consider to be an important component as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so first you start with the MA program, and then the BS program, and then the PhD program.
Yeah,
right?
yes. Now
Yeah.
the PhD program that's been another add-on, and we talked about the PhD program for a number of years, and finally were able to convince the university and the Board of Regents. It was quite an achievement that we were able to integrate the PhD program, because the university doesn't do this lightly. There wasn't necessarily the recognition that we would have enough students to make a go of a PhD program, but given the fact that we've done it on an international scale, it's been extremely successful. So far as attracting students, I'm sure you've heard some of the figures. We admit 4 or 5 people a year and attract 10 times that in applications from all over the world. So we're very, very successful in attracting students. We're ongoing. We have an ongoing concern about placing our students in realistic professional environments when they finish. And that's an ongoing struggle, but that's true of all PhD programs. The constitution of the curriculum has to do with focusing on translation studies, terminology studies, the studies end of things, whereas the MA program is a professional program, very pragmatic in approach. The PhD program is a research-oriented program. This is, again, something that some people applying for the program don't realize, don't appreciate necessarily. Tell your friends if they're applying for the program the worst thing they can do on an application is saying, I want to do this because I want to become a better translator. Now, you may indeed become a better translator, but that's not the purpose of the program. The program is to train researchers and teachers or people who intend to, and any number of our people are interested in going on to become language engineers, to become language consultants, and to enter a higher level in industry, but involving a heavy research component. So and you guys know because you're in the PhD program, you're perfectly aware of that, but incoming students, that's often the surprise, that they're not just going to do more of what they did when they did a master's degree. It's very different.
Yeah, true. Okay, so to found the translation programs here at Kent, you must have had many discussions and meetings.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can you tell us about some of the debates, arguments, fights, if you will, and how did you solve these issues?
It's a consensus process. I remember one of the big discussions that we had early on, and I won't name names. There were people in the group who said, well, we need to accommodate a 4 to 5 year program because that's how long it usually takes for someone to do 2 years of courses, prepare a prospectus, and write a dissertation. There were others in the group who said, oh, no, that's old hat. Everything is speeded up these days. People should be able, we should have, I see some troubled looks. We should be able to expect people to do their 2 years, come out and write their prospectus almost immediately, and as soon as they take their comps, and people will be completing their PhDs in 3 years. Well, experience has proven that, generally speaking, it takes people a year after the comps to prepare an effective prospectus because you have to do a huge amount of research, a huge amount of planning to write your prospectus. You may well write your prospectus. I'm working on one right now. It was looking good, and then when we had one of the other professors look at it, he said, I don't understand this, I don't understand that. It's a question of my being too close to the work to see that, well, this has to be explained, that has to be explained, this whole orientation has to be worked out, and maybe we have to change the orientation. So this is not atypical. It happens to all kinds of people, and but by the time you have indeed prepared an effective prospectus, then you're ready to start writing chapters and putting the whole thing together. And this also, if you're doing any kind of empirical work, this entails the preparation of your IRB, which in itself has to be coordinated with your prospectus. And we've gone through some issues with that. One student in particular got hung up on a rule where they said, oh, you have to finish your prospectus before you do your IRB, which was a foolish idea. And had caused him a great deal of grief. And they realized this doesn't make sense. My daughter, who's a scientist, said, you have to have data before you can write the prospectus. And we're finding that to indeed be the case. So we're learning. The university is learning. But the proof of the pudding is that for most people, it's going to take over 4 years. We have had a couple that were whipped out in 3 or 4 years, but they were exceptional students who already had a great deal of research background before they started into this. For the average, you're none of you average, but for the average PhD student, you should be counting on 5 years. And that gives you a chance to teach as well. We find that if people don't teach, it's a detriment when they go to look for jobs.
So how does the language industry affect the teaching of translation at Kent State, the translation market?
Significantly. We try to stay as close to the language industry as we possibly can. We've gotten beyond the point. At one point, Dr. Dunn and I and Dr. Kobe were all working in the industry. Dr. Dunn and I simply run out of time to do that anymore. Dr. Kobe continues to work in the industry, but we work closely with a number of individuals in the industry, constantly getting feedback. We also try to get as much feedback as we can from former students who've gone out into industry. We're very concerned with what's happening in project management, what's happening in freelance translation, what's happening in terminology management in industry. And we're constantly tailoring our courses, particularly the courses in the computer track, to ensure that we're keeping up with what's happening in industry. We just recently had a discussion in trying to describe outcomes. We had a discussion with what is the difference between what we think is happening in industry and what's actually happening in the workload of individuals, because frequently a person who has one role, technically has one role, may be doing things that we don't necessarily anticipate that person to be doing. Dr. Washburn, whom you may know as a wonderful on-the-spot creator of wonderful bon mots, once recently said, we're actually looking at the industry through a knothole. And that knothole is this effort to keep track. But I'm hoping to put together a survey. I've got to write my own IRB soon, to put together a survey of our former students, maybe some of the former students of the other programs, to find out what's your job title, what do you do most days, and what are some of the tasks that you do in the course of your work. Because I'm suspecting that the distribution of tasks may be a little different from our theoretical ideal distribution.
We want to talk about the language, the computer labs. How have they developed over the years?
This is quite a story.
To the translation market and to the technological advances too. When
I came to Kent, and this won't make a lot of sense to people who don't know these rooms, but a classroom size room, Satterfield 314, was our original computer lab. It consisted of, I think it was 11 or 12 workstations. In part of the room, another part of the room was set aside for an interpreting lab, which never materialized. We had the notion we were going to do interpreting, but we never really developed it. And another part of the room, which was open, anybody could walk in there, which housed servers. And I could tell stories about that, but I won't go into the problem of having your servers open where anybody can walk in and possibly do something. We used that space as student computer lab and occasionally would teach in there. This was not a viable solution. There's another piece of information that I provided earlier on about taxidermy, which lived in a lab, in a room across the hall, and we coveted the taxidermy room. And I'll let you go back to that because I provided that in writing. But we eventually were able to carve out what is now 313 as a computer lab with 12 workstations. And that became a teaching lab. And 314 was eventually developed into a full-blown student lab, and the servers disappeared. We no longer, at one point they were in Dr. Shreve's office or Dr. Dunn's office, and now the university operates its own servers. We don't even mess with servers. We eventually were able to capture both 311 and 313 to develop the labs, and that final development was really exciting for us because we got $500,000 from the state in a special funding program, and we gutted the whole room and installed the infrastructure that you see in 311, 313 right now, and it's still viable. I do not experience problems teaching in that room. It's very effective, very viable. Whereas with the different generations of computer labs that we went through before that, there always was a point when you were frustrated with either the machines or the layout. And so far, I'm not unhappy. We're moving to VMs, virtual machines, and there may be some issues there, But as technology improves and more of our computing is in the cloud, we'll have less dependence on the desktop machines. To be perfectly honest, I expect eventually to see an environment where you walk into those rooms and there are no computers in the room other than perhaps the console machine. People bring their own computers, get on their VMs and work. Now, I could be wrong there, but that's the future I see for those rooms.
So, what message would you like to send to future students or future faculty members who are going to see this video after so many years from now? This is going to stay forever on the website.
Well,
so.
basically for future students coming into the program, for future students in the MA program, to be aware of the computer constraints that you will be facing as a professional translator. In fact, I'm hoping to begin doing that very soon. I'm hoping that this summer, as we get new admissions, that we can let people know. Please go out. There are, and I'll be providing information. There are many resources on the web, tutorials that you can do to master Word, to master Excel, to master PowerPoint, so that those basic skills are mastered before people come here, and that they know they have to master those skills. And they're primed then to learn HTML and to start into the translation tools, so that people are better informed when they come to the program to know this is what this program is about. Now, that said, many of our students coming in choose Kent because they know we're strong in that area. So it's again, this delta factor, the differential between the students who come in without that knowledge and the students who come in with significant background. In the PhD program, I don't see big deficiencies in students coming. The people we're getting in the PhD program are brilliant. And I never fail to be amazed at them. But for people applying to the program, it's important that they know that it is a research degree and that they need to know that that's what they're going to be doing. If they're not interested in that, they probably shouldn't apply. And if they do want to come, they should think about that when they make their application, because sometimes good people submit not necessarily deficient, but less than stellar applications because they have a misrepresentation of what the program is really all about.
What about future faculty members?
Future faculty members? That's a hard one because it depends on where they're being sought. We have a couple new positions that are out there, we're looking for a distance learning person. We're looking for another person in Arabic. We're hoping that those people will also bring us some tools expertise, but that may be that's an open factor. When I eventually retire, we'll be looking, no doubt, for someone in tools, because if you look over the past, at one point we had 3 professors majoring in tools, Dr. Shreve, Dr. Dunn, and myself. And at this point, Dr. Dunn is no longer teaching full-time, and Dr. Shreve is no longer teaching. When I retire, there would be no tools expert, and that would be a disadvantage, particularly in the PhD program, because it would leave us without a PhD level professor who takes on dissertation students in those areas. So we will definitely, depending on what happens with the 2 searches. My pipe dream, and I always think in French, je cherche quelque chose qui n'existe pas, which means I'm looking for something that doesn't exist. But I'm hoping that we will find someone who has come out of a major university to doing Arabic who has a background in the tools. That's possible because there are people particularly studying in Europe, and of course our own graduates. We have our own graduates in the Middle East, but we have a stricture against hiring our own graduates for the most part. So unfortunately there's some wonderful people out there, but that we will not be considering. So we just have to see. And who knows, someone may come forward who's been working in industry, who has the degree and has those qualifications. So it's hard to have advice for a new faculty member because it depends on the description of the position they're applying for and the variety of people that are out there, because it's unpredictable.
Dr. Wright, thanks a lot for
Okay,
your participation. Yeah, thank you.